There now follows a presentation from Workers' World Media Productions.
Tuesday at 9 p.m. or you could be watching us again on Sunday night at 7 o'clock.
Tonight we'll be headlining the situations in Palestine and Swaziland.
Our trade unions are faced with a challenge in relation to the struggle of Palestinians to liberate themselves from the colonial occupation by the Israelis.
The Swazis are struggling to liberate themselves from the rule of the absolute monarch, King Mswati III.
What is the actual state of the Palestinian struggle for their own homeland?
Millions of South Africans have demanded that the South African government expel the Israeli ambassador and recall ours. We ask, why has the government not acceded to this demand?
Swaziland does have a parliament. Why is it said that there is no democracy and human rights in the country?
What is it that the trade unions should and could be doing to support solidarity efforts?
These questions and more we'll be putting to your panel tonight.
We will be giving you our contact points and addresses during the program, so be sure to make a note of them. We invite you to participate. Right. Workers' World, our hour-long edition, starts now.
From England to Poland, every step across the ocean, the ruling classes them is in a mess. Oh yes, the capitalist system a regress, but the Soviet system now progress. So which one of them you think?
Our moderator for this program is Ashraf Raycliffe, and with him tonight is Ayanda Nabe.
Well, Ayanda, welcome to the second show. We're looking forward to many more.
Thank you, Asha.
Welcome to our weekly labour show, Workers' World on Cape Town TV. Our subject is Palestine and Swaziland, and we ask the question, is it solidarity forever? For well over a century, workers all over the world have identified with each other's conditions and struggles for a living wage and better working and living conditions. South African workers were very active in the mass movements that fought in the struggle to liberate us from apartheid oppression. At the same time, millions of workers from all over the world supported the struggle against apartheid that eventually culminated in forcing their governments to pass legislation that enforced boycotts and sanctions against the apartheid regime. In fact, it was Irish female retail workers at a shop in Dublin during the 1960s that took action and effectively started the global anti-apartheid movement. Today, our trade unions are faced with a challenge in relation to the struggle of Palestinians to liberate themselves from the colonial occupation by the Israeli regime, and closer to home, millions of Swazis who are struggling to liberate themselves from the rule of the absolute monarch, King Mswati III. With the recent attacks on Gaza by Israel, that has seen over 2,000 civilians killed and more than 15,000 injured, many left destitute and homeless. What is it that our trade unions and indeed South Africans are doing in support of the Palestinian struggle for liberation? Can we support the liberation, of Palestinians and Swazis, and if so, how? With us to discuss this topic on today's show, we have Dr. Anwar Nagia, founder member of the Palestine Museum. Welcome, Dr. Nagia.
Welcome, thank you.
Good to have you on the show. Our second guest is Wafa Abdurrahman, freelance community development worker from the Action Forum in support of Palestine. Welcome, Wafa.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you as well. And our third guest is Lake Lokele, the spokesperson of the Swaziland Solidarity Network. Welcome, Lake.
Thank you and good evening.
Well, we look forward to your views on this topic. I think it's a critical topic under discussion in South Africa and globally. Next, we watched the short video on the subject put together by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
Hundreds of COSATU members yesterday descended on the Swaziland border to deliver a memorandum of demands to the Swazi king, Mswati. Flanked by members of affiliated organizations, SATAWU, SACP, and Swazi's Podemo, the massive group marched down the N17 in Mpumalanga to the SA Swazi border post of Osok at around midday.
The people of Swaziland must be liberated. They must have a freedom of the political participation. The unbanned political parties, the banned political parties must be unbanned, and we must get the free media within Swaziland, because the media in Swaziland cannot operate freely. And we want the people of Swaziland to be given a life that has got a dignity. And we want Mswati to resign, or maybe to put aside all his regime and all his forces that are tormenting the people of Swaziland.
COSATU said if their demands were not met within 17 working days, they would blockade all goods going in and out of Swaziland. Despite the protest starting several hours late and not quite reaching the intended 3,000 attendance mark, organizers are certain the march was a success.
I was approached by the International Trade Union Confederation, together with the unions in Swaziland and COSATU, to chair a panel that would be an investigation into the worker rights that are supposed to be that of Swazi workers, and to in particular take testimony from workers about their working conditions and their struggle for their worker rights.
The political will to implement this call that emanates from Palestinian trade unions and civil society and political organizations today can be achieved in meaningful ways.
The Zionist movement was active in its propaganda. This film, in French, showed the map of Palestine with areas highlighted as land the Zionists claimed to have acquired as of 1925. The film also shows the areas Zionists planned to acquire within the next 25 years.
Now, NUSA in COSATU committed themselves in real ways to look at the companies, to look at those companies in South Africa, some of them parastatals who supply armaments, and work on a program of action to stop this from happening. So South African workers understand this need for solidarity. And they understand how they benefited from this solidarity previously and why they have to be in the forefront of solidarity with Palestinian workers.
Wafa, let's start with the situation in Palestine. COSATU and several South African organizations have referred to Israel's oppression of Palestinians as a slow genocide and ethnic cleansing. Is this not exaggerating the case to discredit Israel's right to exist?
Let me start off by with the UN's definition of genocide, be it that they're not on the side of the Palestinians but on the side of Israel. But just to take their definition, if I could read that to you, it says, an act committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. Now, just reading their definition of genocide, for me it's obvious that the atrocities committed by Israel against Palestine speaks of genocide. It's a systematic killing, maiming and destruction of the Palestinian people And that's the evidence to say that they are committing genocide. Then the other thing that is quite apparent is the statements by high-ranking officials of the Knesset, where they say that they need to kill off the Palestinian future. And they're basically referring to women that should not become pregnant and give birth to little snakes, which they refer to as the babies, and in effect killing innocent children. So what they're generally doing is they are busy with ethnic cleansing. They don't want to ensure a future Palestine, and that's what they're currently doing. The other issue is that there's more than sufficient historical evidence that exists that Israel was built on Palestinian land, and that they occupied forcefully since the 1940s. So my question to the viewers would be, if you show somebody into your home, you give them a place to stay, and a month later they take over your house, what will you do? And that's the biggest question that we need to ask.
Anwar, can I bring you on that very same question? And is the case not being exaggerated against Israel and their right to exist?
Firstly, let's just say there was never a state of Israel ever in the world. It's an imposed state. It's an agreement that was made by British and American imperialism after the so-called issues in Europe, but particularly the persecution of the Jewish people by Nazi Germany and the Holocaust that befell the Jewish people. And I think the Zionist movement then saw that as justification to identify other countries, particularly Palestine, Uganda, even in South America, where a Jewish settlement or a Jewish state was supposed to be established. But we must make the distinction between Zionism and Judaism. We're certainly not as human beings against the formation of Jewish people. We're not against the statehood of Jewish people. What we are against is Zionism and an imposed state on Palestinians' lands, which was there for centuries. So certainly it's not a question of Israel's ability to exist. They just can't exist anywhere because they don't have and didn't have a particular state. They've chosen to be accepted by the Palestinians more than a century ago, to be kind of protected under the so-called atrocities committed in Europe, Eastern European particularly, and then of course under Nazi Germany. With that formation, they then slowly became a kind of, or the Zionists became a kind of worm that wiggled its way into Palestinian territories, and then by force, obviously, the 1948, particularly the first Nakba, which was a massacre, an absolute massacre, aided and abetted by the British, aided and abetted by the US government and its allies, and obviously in the postmodern period now, in the year 2000, aided and abetted by the so-called Israeli alliance states or American alliance states, like obviously Egypt at the moment, and of course Saudi Arabia, and of course Qatar and other states, which aid and abet the US persecution of the Palestinian people. So what has happened there? Besides the issue as what has raised it, United Nations, which a body that you probably can't trust, but for whatever it's worth, the United Nations have had dozens and dozens of sanctions against the illegitimate occupation by the Israeli Zionist state. And none of these have been implemented because of skewed veto powers the United Nations have offered to certain countries, particularly the US. Any form of United Nations sanctions or punitive measures against the illegitimate state of Israel is blocked by veto rights of both Britain and the kind of perceived first world countries. So you'll never have that. Secondly, or thirdly, or even fourthly, about 40% of the entire population at the moment is almost expelled. 70% of the original land which was occupied by the Palestinian people, the native Palestinian people, don't exist anymore. They've been separated either by walls of division, they've been separated by camps Particularly the biggest concentration camp at the moment is Gaza, with almost 2 million people locked into 40 square meters. All sites of memory, most of their places of worship, over 400 mosques and even churches was destroyed. The Samaritans, which is a Christian group, their burial sites, their entire existence and their memories have all been destroyed. So it is a genocide physically on the population, and it's a genocide on the built environment. So we can't play with semantics here. Far too long we have allowed the situation where perceived reasonable men and women are justifying the existence of a Zionist entity. Even the Jewish population that lives in Palestine accept that, and they are against the Zionist occupation.
A contact point for you now. Here is our Facebook address, Workers' World Labour Show. That's Workers' World Labour Show. We at Workers' World will be happy to hear your views.
Anwar, what is the actual state of Palestinian struggle for their own homeland? And Mr. Ryder, how viable and indeed possible is the notion of the two-state solution currently?
Yeah, I think one has to examine this question very carefully. I mean, obviously we're on a short program. First of all, there is no struggle for Palestinians for any homeland. All that Palestinians are doing is fighting occupation in the land that they already have. So the Palestinians are fighting against people that have stolen their land, and they're fighting occupation. So they're not fighting for self-determination. They're not fighting for a homeland. They always had a homeland for centuries. It is an occupied force, aided and abetted by the British, aided and abetted by America, and aided and abetted by all the allied countries, who props up by different financial ways and military ways the illegitimate regime of Israel. Coming to the whole notion of a two-state solution or two-state theory, that can be so far from the truth, because the fact of the matter is that the occupier is now occupying 70% of the land. Every single day, the state of affairs in Palestine is that more territories that is kind of vacant is just being completely occupied by settlers. More settler communities under Netanyahu has been established. Thousands upon thousands of settlers are either brought in from abroad to settle in Israel, occupied Israel, and of course occupied Palestine, illegitimate Israel. So you can't talk about a two-state solution. South Africa, we had these perceived balkanization of the Bantustans and the homelands. When we had our democracy in 1994, albeit by what we call a negotiated settlement, all of South Africa was free to all of its people. Every morsel or grain of land was returned to South Africa in a single unitary state. We can't have the Palestinians accepting their own land being cut up and only occupying 70%, occupying 30% of their land. So this whole notion of a two-state theory is a manufactured consensus. It's trying to put the perception in the minds of people that the struggle is a kind of just struggle by two equal parts. There is no two equal parts in Palestine. One is an illegitimate occupier by force and by gun, by the might of America and the might of the British and the French and the, in fact, so-called alliance countries, aided and abetted by the Middle Eastern countries. So it's an unparalleled thing. The Palestinians need these occupiers either to be merged into one single Palestinian state, and they either leave or find themselves by their sponsors.
This sounds very close to home during the apartheid era, and I think rightfully so. You've mentioned we've seen a lot of South Africans that have taken to the street demonstrating and demanding that the ambassador of Israel be expelled from South Africa, and our ambassador, who is in Israel, be brought back. Why do you think government has not quite responded to this call, despite the fact that millions and millions of South Africans have made their demands very clear?
Yeah, look, I don't want to dominate the program. I can ask Wafa to answer that, but I have a view on that.
Of course, Wafa.
I think for me, if I look at within the global context, for me, national governments are non-existent, basically. And even though they claim to have power, they basically in the pockets of the imperialist. They're being ruled by the imperialist and does not want to upset the kind of apple cart. Now, I know we've had a massive march on the 9th of August where we put certain demands. Representatives of government were there. They made big woo-ha's about what they're going to do, and they've not done it. So I think because they're in the pockets of the imperialists, there's this double talk and hypocrisy. On the one hand, they come out and support boycott action, and on the other hand, they have meetings with the Zionist organization and so on. So I'm just saying that for me, it's the whole hypocrisy and the double talk, the fact that they are in the pockets, they don't want to upset the imperialist world.
Now, if you are very clear and understand that they do not want to upset the apple cart or the order of the day, what strategies or what actually have you reviewed in your demands that would enable these governments not only to say the wonderful things that we'd want them to say, not forgetting this case that they might not necessarily have been saying everything that we've been expecting of them. Now, what do you want or what do you expect them to be able to do or to do? Because I would assume that now that you understand the scenario, you have had time to go back and review the campaigns. What is reasonable to expect of this government? What is it that they can do?
Well, very reasonably to expect is firstly the South African government and all oppressed South Africans faced a similar fate prior to 1994. Very simply, if government is surprised about their actions or their inability to act, then they've almost got what they call this acute amnesia, political amnesia. For not too long ago, the South African government, who had comrades and war veterans in exile in Botswana, in Angola, in Mozambique, and in Zimbabwe, and across the world, where we were all in exile, were demanded that sanctions be implemented on the South African government, the apartheid South African government. We demanded that all embassies be closed or all diplomatic relationships should be closed to all of the agencies of apartheid. And we're expecting our government to do exactly the same. Now the question is that we have a lot of business and political puppet strings that's being pulled, both by the US and both by the British imperialist countries, on our fledgling democracy. Now, obviously, there were deals made that eventually will compromise the leadership of our country now, so they have no choice but through their different movements to give expression to support the Palestinian people, and they now very wrongfully are saying that the only way to engage the issue was to send diplomatic missions to the illegitimate state of Israel to work as if we can negotiate a settlement on a basis of a two-state theory. Now, the two-state theory can't work and has never worked. Our government is fully aware of that. It's political expedience.
Excuse me, you speak as though you've almost lost hope in what the government will do.
No, we can't lose hope. I think government is in a particular invidious position at the moment. Until they can untie them from that position, it doesn't mean that we are condemning government outright. We are totally against our government's position, and we will persuade them over different kinds of interactions. 1, we will in fact speak to them. 2, we will have demonstrations. 3, we will mobilize more governments around the world to do it. Other governments expel. The Venezuelan government, Latin American countries have expelled them, even to the expense of diplomatic and trade links being compromised in those host countries.
All right, let's hold it there for now.
Do you at home want to make a point or tell us your opinion? Well, here's our email address: ctvlaborshow@wwmp.org.za. That's ctvlaborshow@wwmp.org.za. Our production staff at Workers' World read all your emails, and we enjoy hearing from you. Our email address again is ctvlaborshow@wwmp.org.za.
I think we've been speaking about the expectations that are taking too long to be fulfilled. Do you think trade unions have a role to play? The workers, do workers have a role to play in this? And what is it that you think their role should be?
I think international worker solidarity is very key. And I think that the trade unions within South Africa at the moment can do much more than what they're currently doing. I think when we were in the apartheid era, we had lots of workers internationally having solidarity with us, showing us the way. So I'm saying that they could picket, they could come out in the pickets in solidarity, where we are boycotting Woolworths. They could also have blackening action and refuse to handle the goods coming from Israel, which is both exports and imports. And yeah, I think for me, I would like to see them on the picket line, showing their support practically. We've had lots of talk. They are part of some of the structures, but we hardly see them on the street. So I think from a worker solidarity standpoint, I think they should do more, they should come out, because Worker Solidarity International has been proven to have won lots of worker struggles here and abroad.
And one would fairly expect that there are programs in place which will culminate in these campaigns.
Yes, there are. For example, from the Action Forum side, we meet on a regular basis. We gather at Woolworths across Cape Town. We picket, we boycott their products. We also were engaged in marches. I don't know if you remember the biggest march on the 9th of August, where thousands of people took this to the streets. There's ongoing education that we provide to workers and to communities around the struggles, around local struggles and the linkages between international and local struggles and the importance of giving solidarity action.
Well, maybe, Anwar, if I can bring you in here, you are representing and is a founder of the Palestine Museum. How will the museum also assist in what Wafaz has described as the South African solidarity actions in support of the Palestinians?
I think in four ways, but if you can allow me just to comment.
Briefly,
we formed an organization not long ago, about 2 months ago, called the National Coalition for Palestine. And one of the movements that have first joined was COSATU. So one wants to commend COSATU that have actually stood up and were counted on the issue of the Coalition for Palestine. So the workers themselves find themselves in all of the solidarity marches. Not too long ago, we had a meeting just up the road at Community House, which was organized by the PSG as well as COSATU and other movements. So the worker movements are there. They might not come all garbed in COSATU or NACTU or the various unions' clothing, but they are there in persons. All people that are members of unions invariably are members. Coming to the Palestine Museum. Now, the attempt by the South African kind of Jewish Board of Deputies are trying to put the narrative of the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian issue in different lenses, which the mainstream media is projecting. And that projection is being completely skewed in biased favor of the illegitimate state of Israel. What the Palestine Museum hopes to do is to build bridges around the proper narrative, not the new narrative, the proper narrative of what's taking place with regard to 40,000 homes being destroyed, water wells being destroyed, electricity cables being completely shut down, hospitals being bombed, churches being bombed, mosques being bombed, more land being taken. Probably 40% of every person in Palestine have either been affected, either to be in prison or jailed, or know of a cousin or know of an uncle that is still languishing in prison at the moment. So what the Palestinian Museum hope to do is to bridge the divide in a very soft way, to tell the world that this is not a Muslim struggle. This is a struggle for the legitimacy of the fighting against the illegitimate occupation of Palestine. So we hope to bring it through television, through media, through artifacts, through the contribution of Palestinians to world civilization, in the form of the built environment, in forms of poetry, in forms of science, in forms of religion. All of these particular stories must be told. And the stories have just not been told in the main media. The Palestinians is being dismissed. Their whole existence is being erased in many, many forms. what we hope to do at the Palestine Museum, and in fact this is the first Palestinian museum in the world that has the chronology from the Ottoman period to the 1917, to the 48 Nakba, to the 67 war, and of course to the first, second and third Intifada, to put in a new framed way the Holocaust and the genocide that's unfolding there against the so-called sanity of people that are just not or wanting or choosing not to understand this issue, and we hope to bring that alive. And that's what the museum is going to do.
You are watching Cape Town Television and our presentation of this week's edition of Workers' World. The Workers' World Labour Show is supported by the FNV, the Dutch Trade Union Federation, Bread for the World in Germany, the Olive Palm International Centre in Sweden, the Norwegian People's Aid, as well as the Department of Labour of the South African government.
I am young, I am African, and I am free. Pictures surround me, influence me, and expose me.
Ngikhulile, ulwazi isikhali sami, ngiwumvikeli.
You are my teacher and my mentor. You clear the path before me. You guide my choices so that I know what my freedom means.
Ngibona umhlaba nezilingo zawo.
Recognizing danger, I defend myself and those that I love.
As I grow, I look to you. I seek your advice and your approval. You teach me to understand what you have experienced, and that makes me stronger.
Ngingumholi wekusasa lethu, umalusi. Ukwazi ukuthi uphephile kwenza ngiqine idolo.
I want to see all the things that the world has to offer me. Movies.
Games.
I want to read. Connect to media.
At home.
At the movies.
With my friends.
I learn to take responsibility for myself.
We share that responsibility as you grow.
I watch, I play. I take in the words and the pictures that surround me.
I watch and guard you, keeping you safe.
My choice is informed by your choice.
And the right choice will protect you.
And set us free.
We inform, you choose.
You are watching Workers' World. The question we are discussing is Palestine and Swaziland, is it solidarity forever? We have our guest on the show today, Dr. Anwar Nagia, the founder member of the Palestine Museum, Wafa Abdurrahman, freelance community development worker from the Action Forum in support of Palestine, and Lucky Lokele, the spokesperson of the Swaziland Solidarity Network. Lucky, you mentioned you wanted to make a comment on the Palestinian question before we move on to the Swazi question. Please do so.
Well, yes, the people of Palestine, they've been humiliated, worse humiliated whilst the world watches, and partly some supports it. People must understand the act of solidarity by its nature, it's an act of love. We've got to move on and show some love to the people of Palestine by acting in solidarity with them, in listening to their demands that they've listed. I think I won't go back there. They've been presented and they're beautiful, and we are doing it wherever we are. And I can assure you the people of Swaziland, they are with them all the way. One will borrow to the late Samora Machel to say, solidarity by its nature knows no boundaries. Therefore, we're with them.
Well, can you then take us to the situation in Swaziland itself, Lucky? Is it true that Swaziland is ruled by an absolute monarch, and how does this differ from the situation in Britain that also has a queen?
Well, the situation in different is a little bit different. You have a constitutional monarchy where the Queen Mother is sort of like playing a ceremonial role. In Swaziland, you have the king that is above the constitution, above the military, above everything. If the king steals anything from you, you cannot take him to any court of law. If you do that, you'll have to cross 7 rivers. Given the size of Swaziland, which is 17,000 square kilometers, it means crossing either to Mozambique or South Africa.
That's the situation.
Yes.
And that's what is being dictated by the current king of Swazis.
That's what is happening in Swaziland right now.
Well, If I could ask you, Wafai, in terms of your understanding of the situation we fought here in South Africa, as well as that happens now, as we've spoken of Palestine and Swazi, do you think that this should be supported by the South African government, or that should in fact be taking strong action in the situation?
I think, yes, I think there should be strong action against the Swazi government. If you just think about it, Swaziland depends 70 to 80% of the GDP, or of the products and services they procure from South Africa. South Africa plays a major role and impact in terms of their trade relations. So I think the South African government can do something. They are within the means to do something about the situation in Swaziland.
We're talking about the South African government being able to do something. What requests or demands have you put to the South African government? Because we have been seeing a lot of support coming from South Africa to Swaziland. Is that the desired support? What is it that you wish to see happening?
Well, the problem cannot be pushed to South Africa alone. South Africa, you remember, is 20 years into its democracy. The first question that I will ask, what has Mozambique done since 1975? Because the political parties in Swaziland were banned by King Sobhuza II in 1973. And in the silence of the very same nation that were already democratized by then. Therefore, South Africa, if South Africa acts alone, will then be seen as a bully or acting as a big brother. But yes, South Africa can do more in terms of putting in sanctions, but if Mozambique speak in one language with South Africa, definitely the SADC region, subsequently African Union, will speak in one voice. But yes, the people of Swaziland, they feel betrayed, mainly by the liberation movements, which they themselves participated and lost brothers and sisters as giving solidarity. Not that they want to be paid back. Solidarity by its nature is free. It comes from love, as I indicated earlier on. But what happens is you have an organization called SADC, which the people of Swaziland see it as the most useless organization ever in the history of humanity.
Okay, you're talking as though you don't have a parliament. You know, there's always this reference of a need for democracy. We see a parliament in Swaziland.
Well, there's no parliament in Swaziland. It's a state-managed thing where the king, before you stand as an MP, the king has got to approve you through the chief. So therefore, and after you are elected, the first thing you do, you go and kneel down and pay allegiance to the king. Therefore, who are you representing? It has become what we call a fattening ranch to say, okay, well, I will have a salary for 5 years and my kids will be looked after. As long as you say bayete to the king, you are guaranteed, if you are lucky, a position in one of the committees of the king or to the cabinet. So there is no parliament in Swaziland. It is the most, in fact, if you say there's a parliament to an ordinary Swazi, he feels extremely insulted.
On Twitter, tell us what you think. It's at WWMP_Labour Show. Twitter is quick and easy in 160 characters. Tweet us at WWMP_Labour Show.
Anwar, what are the similarities for you in terms of the South African struggle, the Palestinian struggle, and the struggle in Swaziland, and what sort of support can be provided?
Firstly, if we're talking about a democracy that's supposed to prevail in each of the three regions, there's only a democracy in South Africa. The Israeli illegitimate state of Israel have expelled most of the people, ethnically cleanse the people, and then they say there's a free vote and a free democratic vote. So that's in illegitimate Israel. So yeah, I was referring to the no democracy in the illegitimate state of Israel. And then of course South Africa has a democracy because people have the right of assembly. In Swaziland there is no right of assembly. In Swaziland, when you go to the perceived puppet show parliament, you are nominated as an individual. No political formation can nominate you, no political formation can assemble you, and you can't then align yourself. So two of the democratic movements One is the trade union movement, which was started by the teachers movement, and the other movement, which is called the Trade Union Congress of the Swazi Trade Union Movement. All of these organizations are banned. Their leaders are banned if they don't pay allegiance to perceived tribal customary clans, and the clan system is used as a way to kind of foist participation in the House of Assembly. So there was a big raucous last year in the elections in 2013 when no public education was given, no person was allowed to campaign, no one was allowed to give education or funding to any training. It was left to the NGOs to give expression to democratic participation inside of Parliament. Even the National Assembly and the House of Assembly, both, there were contestations in this, and that has led to the absolute collapse. And you're absolutely right, Lucky, the monarchy has absolute control. It's very different where in Britain the Queen only has certain powers, mostly ceremonial, but other powers where both the Prime Minister have to declare himself available to the Queen, and then they serve under the duty of the Queen. But then that's where it stops. Parliamentary democracy takes its form like in South Africa. Political parties can organize. Political parties can have a program. Political parties can associate themselves with anything, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, or in the middle. None of these exist in any form in Swaziland and has never existed. So you can't talk about a democracy. Presently, people are languishing in jails. The police arrest any organizations or movements that are practicing. And this is the absolute discourse that is happening even in last year's elections.
Well, yes. One of the issues that was clearly mentioned was the fact that there's a lot of disappointment in the liberation movements. You said, Lucky, that you're not so much angry with South African government, but you are not happy with how things are done. And of course, you're blaming the two governments of South Africa and of Mozambique. But when it comes to liberation movements, what is it that you would expect them to assist you with?
Well, it's simple. Firstly, you give refugee status unconditionally to the people of Swaziland fleeing this criminal called Mswati hiding under the head of state. Secondly, we are demanding, and it's not like they're doing us a favor, a base where the Swazis will stay and train themselves militarily, because there is nothing that you can do in Swaziland following protocol that is non-existent. The only way now is to engage the regime in the very same language that they speak, because it will be unfair for the people of Swaziland to be expected to respond in Spanish when they're spoken to in English. So surely there has to be some kind of communication, and I believe we've reached that stage.
Well, I'd like to come back to another point that you raised earlier, and my question is around the issue of the subjects, because the Swazi people, the way you have quite eloquently explained it to us, is that they have now been reduced to being subjects of the king. Now, in terms of accountability, is there any sense of accountability? Can subjects make the traditional head accountable? Because if you're dealing with a country and you're dealing with governance and people, there needs to be a level of accountability.
Yes, under a normal society. Unfortunately, we are talking to an abnormal one. So it remains a dream.
It remains a dream.
And there's no way whatsoever that you can make the king account under the current conditions. Of course, with the support that he receives and enjoys through SADC. Now, like I said, for instance, the king makes a call. He was in Equatorial Guinea not long ago, signing a business deal. He calls the head of revenue authority, what you call in South Africa, SARS, to say, how much have you collected last month? He says, I have collected about 60 million. Then the king says, listen here, transfer 30 million into my personal account. I want to invest that money. Here is a prime minister in Swaziland and the minister of finance expecting this money to be budgeted for. Here we are speaking to a person that receives 700 million a year, a personal budget. And on top of that, he receives a salary, of which it's not regulated. No one knows how much he earns. But every quarter of the year, he receives 45 million disguised as royal projects, like managing and building palaces. On top of that, again, even if he leaves the country for medical checkups in Pretoria, the king has got a per diem of $50,000 that he takes with. The woman or his wife that he will take will get about 40. Normally when the king leaves, there's this thing in so-called the new created culture that says the king does not go alone wherever he goes. He must have libandla or a council that accompany him. So normally the number, it's not below 60 minimum. For instance, he was in New York on the African summit where he had a delegation of 60. One wife and half of the delegation were his kids. One of them, together with their friends, received $15,000 as a per diem. So here you don't have a country. You have some kind of a scheme headed by a family man. The government is just more like to window dress the people of the world and bluff the people of Swaziland that there is a government. The only road that you will see being built towards a community, it's when the king has decided to build a palace, then you will see a tarred road. It's even worse for a school. You can get sick in Swaziland at your own risk. If you go to a Swazi hospital and you get a painkiller, consider yourself very lucky.
At your own risk.
SMS us here at Workers World. The number throughout South Africa is 083-233-8556, and each SMS is charged at standard rates. Pick up your mobile and text us. We will be pleased to hear from you. The text number again is 083-233-8556. That's 083-233-8556.
Well, if I could ask this question as a follow-up, Lucky, and perhaps the other panelists could add to this as well. Why is it that the ANC government, both in the case of the Swazis and the Palestinians, seems to be not being proactive in supporting, as we've heard earlier in the show, the sort of international solidarity support that South Africa had enjoyed? So from your point of view, Lucky, in the Swazi situation, why do you think the ANC government is not doing more?
Well, you have comrades in the ANC that have conveniently forgotten where they come from. Some of them, I'm sorry I'll have to name them. You have Matthew Posa, who has allowed himself to be a business advisor to the king, together with other business partners. You have a company called MTN South Africa, of which I will definitely make a call to South Africans from Cape to Cairo and to extend it to Africa as well, to say where MTN is the only mobile network in Swaziland, precisely because the king owns 10% shares there. So therefore, he does not want any form of competition that will then interfere with his interest, in this case, profit. Now, where the Prime Minister as well has got 4%, it has never ever had anywhere in the world. Now, MTN, the rates are too high. The Swazi people are forced to consume it because that's the only form of communication. Now, our call to the people of South Africa, where they have more than one network, simply take out that SIM card of MTN and dump it. That's the only way MTN South Africa will listen to the people of Swaziland. And I can assure you, people at the highest level in South Africa, up to the deputy president, I'm told he has just recently taken out or relinquished those shareholdings that he had at MTN. We are expecting them to give that solidarity. Honestly, they are not doing the people of Swaziland any favor. It is a revolutionary obligation, and it's long overdue from their part.
Well, we've got just a few minutes before, far from your point of view, in terms of the role of the South African government, the ruling party, the ANC.
For me, and this is my point of view, I think that they are clearly in bed and on the side of the imperialists, and they don't really care much as to what is happening with people on the ground. I think for me it's about trade ties, not wanting to lose that. in the case of Swaziland, they are 70-80% partner, trade partner, not wanting to kind of upset things there as well. In the cases of Israel, the Zionist lobby economically very strong, and they're not prepared to stand up against those industries and say, look, we are against what you do. So I think it's all about that. It's all about the whole neoliberalism, imperialism, and the fact that they are tied. And that's why they're not coming out in support. And I think I agree with Lucky. They have forgotten where we've come from. They've forgotten that the world out there gave us international solidarity in our time of need. And they've forgotten that we need to plow back.
Well, Anna, from your point of view, the role of the South African state, the ANC ruling party government, both in Palestine and Swaziland, can they do more and why are they not?
Yeah, I think if one examines what they call the bilateral agreements between the particular states, and particularly the cooperation in our region called SADC, which Lucky referred to earlier, there was this whole notion in the African Union, and now it's called the what's the replacement for the African Union? Whatever the name is, the African Union has certain agreements that we will not interfere in the domestic policies of what we call sovereign states and not aid and abet every particular uprising that are taking place. I mean, we saw what happened in Car in the Central African Republic, where South Africa has actually put boots on the ground via the aid of the United Nations, and all to protect only the interests of those particular corporations that exist there. And that's the only time you will find them come and interfere and almost undermine the bilateral agreements that were stated there. Now, coming to South Africa and the illegitimate state of Israel, which is a figment of people's imagination, they have a lot of apartheid linkages. In 1948, the nationalist power took power here. 1948, the huge Nakba and catastrophe in Palestine with the massacre and the maiming of hundreds of thousands of people, expelling thousands and thousands, even millions of people. And that agreements are still in place. And therefore, to seek favor with American and British companies, they can't act just unilaterally until these guys release them out of these kind of agreements. Remember, we still have an odious debt, and that odious debt is an apartheid debt that has to be paid, and that debt is strangled over our heads. So if our government misbehave, they put pressure on us to accelerate the debt. And remember, when we took over, the debt was rescheduled. Although it was a debt not made by the working class people of South Africa, it was an odious debt. And so it goes just beyond diplomatic ties. It goes where the actual purse strings are being set. Remember when the Gaza bombing took place, President Zuma actually had a delegation led to America, and they were silent because the American Foundation actually hosted and received him, and they signed certain trade agreements to keep cordial relationships at the diplomatic level.
Thank you very much for that. And at this point, I think critical to thank our guest, Dr. Anwar Nagia, founder, member of the Palestine Museum. Thank you much for your contributions.
Thank you for having us.
Wafa Abdurrahman, freelance community development worker from the Action Forum in support of Palestine. Thanks for your contribution, Wafa. And Lucky, our representative from the people of the Swaziland. Thank you for your contributions, spokesperson of the Swaziland Solidarity Network. And that's where we conclude our discussion this week on Palestine and Swaziland, having asked the question, is it solidarity forever? And I think it's quite clear that our panel has not just spelled out the problems that the Swazis are facing, in particular our immediate neighbors, sandwiched between ourselves and Mozambique, and the need for South Africans to be aware about the issues, the oppression, the exploitation, and clearly the type of democracy that is supposed to be existing in Swaziland. We've heard our panel indicate what, in comparison with Palestine and in comparison with South Africa, is happening. We now have a situation where the support for both the Swazis and the Palestinians from trade unions and the trade union movement in South Africa, and you as the South African citizens, the viewers of Cape Town Television and the Workers' World Labour Show. It's key for us then to decide, as we end the show, to remember a working class united will never be defeated.
Thank you very much to our guests, and we wish you well in your future endeavors and your campaigns. Thank you.
From England to Poland, every step across the ocean, the ruling classes them is in a mess. Oh yes, the capitalist system a regress, but the Soviet system now progress. So which one of them you think is best? When are the two of them the workers a contest? When crisis is the order of the day, when so much people crying out for change nowadays. So what about the working class, comrade chairman? What about the working class? They bear the cars, they carry the cross, and them now go forget them tongues in gadongs. Them now go forget them tongues. From the east to the west, to the land I love the best, the ruling classes them is in a mess. Oh yes, crisis is the order of the day. The workers them demanding more pay every day. The peasants want a lot more say nowadays. The youth them rebelling everywhere. Everywhere, insurrection is the order of the day. There's a lot of people crying out for change nowadays. Nobody blame it on the black working class, Mr. Racist. Blame it on the ruling class. Blame it on your capitalist boss. We pay the cost, we suffer the loss, and we now go to get new cross, not a Ross. We now go to get new cross.